What shall I love if not the enigma? One must picture everything in the world as an enigma and live in the world as if in a vast museum of strangeness. Italian painter Giorgio di Chirico. This is The Artful Painter. Art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Victoria Taylor-Gore's surrealistic, luminous paintings are imaginary places at the boundary of twilight and dreams. Seemingly devoid of people, her paintings pull you into their quiet mystery. Her paintings fill your mind with questions. Who opened the motel room door? Who left the suitcase by the neatly made bed? Who is in the car whose lit headlamp spills light through the open door of the motel? And where is this lonely motel? Where did the people go? Have they just arrived, or are they just getting ready to depart? It appears that the inhabitant of the room has just stepped out of sight. Or have they? Then you realize that perhaps you are the inhabitant of that room. You've become a part of Victoria's painting and its mystery. Victoria, who recently retired as the Dean of Liberal Arts at Amarillo College, now devotes herself full-time to creating pastel and mixed media paintings inspired by her love of film noir, the landscape of the High Plains, and Route 66. Her use of exaggerated perspective creates a sense of unease and suspense. The open doors and windows invite movement between intimate interiors and dark, open exteriors, heightening your curiosity as to what lies beyond or within. Victoria's unique visual vocabulary is beautifully expressed in her evocative paintings of quiet surrealism. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Victoria, I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised. It was in August. Yeah, I think it was the August issue of Southwest Art. And I'm thumbing through it as I always love to go through the magazine when it first comes in. And I came across a show preview and I saw these pastels. And I said, I know who this is. I hadn't even looked at the headline. I just saw the pastels. They just really, they just jumped out at me. And I look up at the headline and it says, Victoria Taylor-Gore. And I said, I know her. Talked to her 10 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah. So that was really cool to see that in Southwest Art magazine. Yeah. We first met 10 years ago, met virtually, of course, via podcasting on my old Digital Convergence podcast, which is now called Artful Camera and hasn't been produced in almost a year. But Yours was one of my favorite episodes because it married art and, it was visual arts, but it was the analog and the digital combined together. So I'm happy to have you on The Artful Painter today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So you just recently retired.
Yes.
From university, and that was the Amarillo College in Amarillo, Texas. Have I got that right?
Yes, I did. After 18 years, and I was just ready to get back to painting full time. So I love students, and I miss teaching. So I am teaching part time again. But I was honored to get a lot of promotions and become an administrator. And I enjoyed that for the time I did it. But, the artist soul in me was really screaming to get back to
let me out
producing artwork again, because I just got so busy I didn't have time to paint. So it just had to happen eventually. So here I am, full-time artist. So it's great.
You were in administration. Tell us a little bit more about what you did at the college, because it was heavily tied toward the visual arts.
I taught all the time I was there, all 18 years even when I was an administrator, I still kept a few classes. But, at first I taught drawing and design and art history and art appreciation and helped develop some of their online courses. And then after a while, the chair of the department retired and they needed a new chair. And I, of course, didn't even want to apply. And I kind of got the pressure to apply. So I went ahead and applied. And of course, I got it. And, it was a blessing and a curse.
Oh.
Because, it took me away from just focusing on teaching and making my artwork. But I loved my faculty. I call them my faculty because I tried to do my best to do a good job for them and for the students and represent my faculty very fairly. And then after a few more years, I was promoted to a new division called the School of Creative Arts, where they combined visual arts and music and theater and mass media, which was pretty exciting. So I got to do that for a few years, and then they reabsorbed the School of Creative Arts back into the liberal arts, where it had been before. So I was promoted to Dean of Liberal Arts, and then I was over the arts and history and English and psychology and all of that. So, as you can imagine, the responsibilities really broadened, and I spent less time on the arts. I was just ready to kind of bring my focus back to fine art. So, but I enjoyed my peers and the people I worked with, and it was a great experience. But I'm sort of a wandering gypsy. Eventually, I move on.
Seems like a lot of us are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really enjoy about your artwork, it stands out. And here's how it stands. This is what I see. It's almost, I guess it is a form of surrealism. Realism, I've focused a lot on artists that have done representational art that focus on the outward world, but yours seem to focus inward, even though they're exterior scenes. Some are intimate interior scenes, others open up into the twilight of the setting sun. Light is predominant, shadow is predominant, geometry is predominant in it. It's almost like film noir.
Oh, thank you, because I love film noir.
And that's my description of your artwork. How do you categorize it?
I agree with everything you said. Really, it's an imaginary world, and it's influenced by, just a vocabulary that I've developed over the years. Certain things that I'm attracted to, and I tend to focus on and repeat. I really admire realistic painters, but I've always been a little more interested in sort of a personal interpretation. They're a step away from realism and more surreal. I have a type of surrealism that's quieter than my early days. My early days, they were very kind of out there with dolphins flying through space.
I think we all have that phase.
So I calmed it down a little bit. Now it's surreal in a quieter way, and no matter what I do, I never escape the description of surrealism, because I guess they come from an inner place, and I kind of distill things through that filter, but they have just kind of a quiet feeling, but there's always an implied meaning. What's going on with that suitcase, and where is that car going, and who was just in the room? Because they're not figurative pieces, but they
people you don't see people in it, right?
Yeah, but there's a hint that people were there, or maybe will arrive soon. So that's always really fun. And even when I do just a landscape, I've been doing some landscapes lately. they still feel like sort of mysterious objects,
Right.
Think like a bush or a tree or a saguaro cactus. They still feel like kind of mysterious figures in a play. I kind of imbue objects with meaning and life. You feel like those chairs could walk away or something.
Yeah.
Kind of lifelike. But they don't need people. They're just the sets for people.
You almost become, it's as if, so it's not a figurative painting, but it's as if you're in that painting. Perhaps it's your dream. I'm looking at it and saying, maybe that's my dream, and I'm flying over this building where I'm settling into this living room where there's a fire in the fireplace. You have drawn in the viewer. They become the subject of the painting, even though you don't see them in it, but they're being interactive with that painting.
That is always what I say I want to do for, forever.
Well,
I've said if I put a figure in the painting, then the viewer feels intimidated to go into the painting. I want the viewer to go in and, like you said, fly through there, go around there and go back to the mountain behind, and I like to play with diagonals to kind of encourage people to kind of zigzag through. I like to play with the composition so it kind of brings people in and moves them around the painting. So absolutely, that's very important that people project themselves into the work.
Yeah, lines are very dominant. You have an unusual, in a good way, perspective. I like that you force us to see things. Oh, force is a strong word, but you help us to see things from a different vantage that we probably wouldn't see otherwise. Kind of a bird's eye or a drone's eye view of the landscape.
Yes. Isn't it funny that you use the word drone?
I know.
Technology is the drone's eye view. I love that. Absolutely.
You can't take the nerd out of me, Victoria.
Well, perspective is just something that kind of happened to me in graduate school, and I had been looking at Van Gogh's work a lot, particularly the little bedroom scene, and I don't know what happened. I just started drawing and using kind of a exaggerated perspective. Sometimes it looks sort of like a wide angle view where the lines are kind of bent around, and I just started having fun with it. And after that, I just did perspective that way. And the funnest part of doing my work are the little sketches I do. And they always have that, it's very intuitive now. It's not something I labor over. That really distorted perspective is just fun. And I think it gives my work a little character. And there are times where I, go back and really study more observational perspective, but that doesn't last long. Pretty soon I'm back to kind of that character, but it's a real fun process to play with perspective.
You mentioned earlier you've developed a vocabulary, and I'm interested in what do you mean by vocabulary? Well,
it's repeating certain images, and one of the central ones is the house, and they're imaginary houses, but they're symbolic to me. It's not a house that I drove by and I'm painting. It's these created houses, but when in general the house is a symbol of the self. It's a symbol of home, and there are all kinds of things that people associate with a home. So there's been in history that the writings about the house is a treasure house of wisdom. But so on a very general idea, I just love the symbolism of the house. It's fun to play with the idea of interior and exterior and the meaning behind that. It's a different feeling when you're outside looking in or when you're inside looking out.
And you give us both of those views. You're either outside looking in or you're inside looking out. And it's as if something is about to happen or has just happened.
Exactly. Well, when you're outside looking in, it's a feeling of, you're on this journey and maybe you're pausing and looking in, and when you're on the inside, it's sort of a still quiet time, but you still have doorways and windows and even paintings within the interior that are framing the outside world. So it's a little different feeling. And this is really good to talk about because sometimes I'm trying different things and I'm experimenting. I've done a lot of that the past year, and it's good to kind of settle in and talk about the broad journey of my work and how those symbols are just, I call it part of my vocabulary, my visual vocabulary. Like Magritte repeated his sort of generalized self-portrait with the man with the bowler hat and the moon and the umbrella and, certain things that he would go back to and repeat in his paintings. I was talking to my students about that last night. And so I feel like I have certain things that repeat. And it's funny because, I always have had a chair somewhere. And then I kind of moved away from the chair. And it was always like a real, just a simple wooden chair with not much cushioning. And for the past year, I've been doing these plump, soft armchairs. And I think that's my age setting in.
I want my paintings to be more comfortable.
More comfortable chair.
Oh, it's good to have a good sense of humor about our serious work, right?
So it is. Yeah. It is. But I still love those little simple chairs too.
Yeah. You mentioned just a moment ago about experimenting, and that's where I am. I'm in a very experimental stage. I'm in a learning stage, which also involves exploratory experimentation because, you are working, I'm working toward, what is it that I really want to say in a painting? How do I want to say it? What appeals to me? I don't think I've done it enough to really know yet, but experimentation is the path toward discovering that. So it seems like you've been on a path of experimentation and discovery with your work. You've developed a solid vocabulary, as you put it, to create these paintings that just are extremely evocative. They just draw you in.
Well, thank you. And I'm trying to experiment, I think, more with technique than my style and my imagery. It's just hard for me to escape my style and my imagery.
Is that a good thing, or do you consider that a disadvantage?
I think it's an advantage and a disadvantage. I think sometimes it's like, not that I've had a long marriage by any means, but it's kind of like being married. Sometimes it's really good to have a real long lasting relationship. And sometimes you're frustrated and you need to change it up a little bit, So I think it's both good and bad. But I have found that experimenting with processes has been sort of revitalizing for me. Just simple things like using white paper instead of black paper that I've used forever. And it kind of gives me a new palette. The latest thing that I've done is I've done some pastel washes on watercolor paper before I start going over with pastel.
How does that work?
It's wonderful. And it gives the piece almost a painterly feeling, and not like the traditional pastel artists that use sanded paper and alcohol washes, and it still comes out looking like pastel. The way I'm playing with it looks like a painting. It's hard to tell what it is, which is really fun.
Oh,
It's got
yeah.
painterly strokes and washes, and then some drier pastel areas. So it's kind of like mixed media. So, and I just discovered that recently. So, on some smaller pieces. So I'm excited to try that a little bigger. It's just fun trying new things, but it's like an old friend. My work is really something that has been a part of me for a really long time. And I don't see myself ever getting away from my style. But it's really good for me to draw from observation sometimes. Sometimes I get a little more realistic and get some ideas and new details and like strengthening that vocabulary. But then I kind of take off and get more intuitive again.
Are you going outside or inside? Both?
Both, but I really cannot escape my style even when I draw from observation. I always have this little way of drawing that's hard to change, but it's really good for me to just like draw a bunch of chairs and draw a bunch of landscapes and draw different houses, but they're never in the finished piece. They're never like one house. They're a combination of what I drew from different houses. But it's really good to just look at things and draw and get more ideas, and then I go stylize it in my own way. Then I go interpret it.
So you're collecting your observations. You have all these pieces. You're composing your paintings based on those fragments here and there to say what you want to say in that particular painting.
Yes, and it's similar in a way to what ancient societies did with their depictions of things. They wouldn't all go out and draw from observation. Maybe someone did at some point, but then they kind of passed down this way of drawing a figure or a throne or something. They have like a stylized vocabulary of how they show things. And, once in a while, someone will go out and draw from observation and freshen it up, but then it's passed down to people who repeat that way of drawing an object. And that's kind of what I do. I go out and I draw from nature and from observation, and then I take that and stylize that, and then I use that image, kind of put it into my vocabulary.
Your primary medium to work in is pastels.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, I'm self-taught with pastels. In college, they didn't teach pastel. You never got a pastel lesson. You had a drawing class with pencils and charcoal, and then you had a painting class with oil or acrylic, but no one covered pastel. I got some pastel pencils and just started experimenting with them. And that's how I got started on a very small scale. I was doing some very imaginative, actually surrealistic pieces with they were very inspired by Islamic patterning. So I had to really get into detail. And then after going to graduate school, that's when I started playing with perspective in a totally different way, which necessitated me using the broader pastel sticks. That's when I got into that. And I still use pastel pencils, but I started using Rembrandt pastels. Then as the years went by, I got into better quality. And not that Rembrandt isn't great, but
Well, they each have their own different characteristics, I'm sure. Some are harder than others. Some are more buttery than others.
Yeah, I started getting into the buttery ones like Unison and Schminky.
Your color choices are bold and high contrast and very colorful. I like that. What do you have? Of course, you know what? I'm an oil painter, so I can have 6 tubes of color and that's that. But as a pastelist, you have to have a wide assortment of colors, I imagine.
Yes, I do. I do collect a lot of colors. I respond kind of like you're in a bakery and you're really hungry when I shop for pastels. I have an appetite.
That's a good. I like that. Do not go into an art store when you're hungry.
So I'm adding more natural colors than I used to, and I love playing with complementary colors to really create a sort of a sparkle, a glow. When you contrast warm and cools and complementary colors, you get a lot of vibrant color. But it was really funny one time on Facebook. Some pastels I've done lately. I did a desert scene. I'm showing in Tucson, and so I'm doing these kind of surreal, melancholy desert scenes. And this person posted that, well, this kind of artwork would not be possible without all the new neon glow colors that are available. And I just chuckled because I just use regular colors.
Yeah.
I don't use neon glow colors, but that was a compliment. But it's not new technology. It's just playing with complementary contrast.
That's an important lesson to us as artists. It's one that I'm learning as I go. Is how to work with the values and how to make the colors really work for you without just all being at turning up the volume to 11 on the dial.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have worked with pastels. Have you worked with other mediums?
Yes, I have been working for several years with gouache. Well, not traditional gouache, with acrylic gouache. There's a few different companies that make it. I use Turner acrylic gouache and Holbein acrylic gouache, and I love it because it's stronger than gouache. Years ago I did gouache and they would crack and I just didn't know what I was doing and I kind of backed off from it. And then when I saw that they were making acrylic gouache, which has the strength of acrylic, but the soft, matte, rich color of gouache, I was just in love. So I've done a lot of little miniature acrylic gouache pieces. This fall, I experimented with one on canvas, and it was really fun to do.
You use gouache on canvas?
It's acrylic gouache. It's really acrylic that has gouache, the qualities of gouache.
So it's super matte compared to normal pigments.
Yeah. And it looks different than acrylic to me, to my untrained eye, because I haven't worked with acrylic before.
Well, I just bought a set, an introductory set from Liquitex. They call it their acrylic gouache, and I want to give it a try. I've heard a lot about this. I thought about getting with traditional gouache, but I do. When I first started, I worked with acrylics, and I liked it to some extent. Didn't like the smell, but I liked. It was an relatively easy medium to work with, except for the color shift. I had to get used to that. So, which reminds me, do you experience that using acrylic gouache? Do you see a color shift?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. I think the paint to me looks and feels like gouache, but it has the strength of acrylic. And I haven't tried the Liquitex brand, but the Holbein and Turner brands are just wonderful. Like, I'm just totally in love with this paint. So we'll see where that goes. At some point, I think, now that I'm creating pastel washes, what can I do with that? And washes with the acrylic gouache.
So the two media, so they're compatible with one another.
Yes, I could work with them together. Now, I'm just going to have to experiment. Now, this is on paper. The possibility of mixing the acrylic gouache and the pastel would have to be on paper. The gouache layers would have to be watered down, which is fine if it's on paper.
What kind of paper are you using?
The paper that's really wonderful for the pastel is Canson Stonehenge 140-pound hot press. And it's just like a magic paper that you can put washes down, but you still get this tooth to the paper to where it'll hold pastel, because if you have too many washes, then, at a certain point, the paper gets too slick, for lack of a better word, for the pastel to really, hold, grip that paper. Anyway, that's the next thing I want to try is kind of mixing paint with pastel washes and see what happens, and then going back on with dry pastel, and then, I could go back and wash over that. So we'll just see what happens with that. And then the acrylic gouache on canvas, one thing I found that really helped me was Liquitex airbrush medium. And I really searched for something that would work because this acrylic gouache is a little different than acrylic, I think. And you can really destroy the quality of it, which is that nice matte color.
Yeah, the moment you add some medium to it, you've altered what it is.
Yeah, it's compatible with mediums, but you kind of ruin the whole purpose, and you might as well have just gotten plain acrylic, which is probably cheaper.
Yeah.
But I found that airbrush medium doesn't take away that nice matte quality and that rich surface quality.
What is airbrush medium made out of? What is it?
I don't know the chemistry of it, but I know that what it does is, the problem with acrylics is people do washes, but they'll use water to thin it out. And what that does is it prevents the paint from chemically bonding to the ground or the canvas. It just doesn't have enough to grip on. So later it'll kind of flake off or just, you can wipe it off, basically. It's not adhering to the canvas. So what mediums do is they help it bond to the ground, the gesso and canvas, right?
Right, yeah.
So if you thin it out with too much water, there have been a lot of problems with the paint adhering and then you go to varnish it and it all wipes off. You get really serious problems with that. Well, what airbrush medium can do, it's designed to thin acrylic to spray through an airbrush. So you can thin it and get these wonderful washes, but it still sticks to the canvas.
But are you using an airbrush or are you just using the medium?
I'm just using the medium. I mean, you could use an airbrush, but you can just make a wash with a brush. But airbrush medium thins acrylics or acrylic wash like water does. You can make these beautiful transparent washes on canvas with airbrush medium. It's wonderful. And it took me a few months to figure that out. So I'm sharing that with the world.
That is a wonderful tidbit. Because I was wondering about that when I got this kit. I haven't used it yet. It's on my to-do list to experiment with. But I got to wondering, is there a medium that I could use with it, or do I even need it, considering how I might be using it? So I don't know. This is all new to me. See, I've never done pastels. Well, I did pick up a pastel stick one time, and I felt like I was writing on a chalkboard, and it's probably because I had a poor quality pastel. I couldn't stand the touch of it. It was tough for me, so I never went back to it. But I probably should have tried some of the more buttery pastel sticks and would have felt differently about it. I just revealed a prejudice of mine. Isn't that terrible? I love pastel art, but I can't stand to touch it. Just weird like that.
No, I understand. It's a messy business. So
yeah, but it's beautiful. How do you? So most all of your work that's with pastel is on paper, obviously. So how do you display that? Does it have to be under glass, or is it? How does that work?
well, yes, it has. It's just like a watercolor or a drawing. It has to be framed under glass, and I don't use fixative because if anything's going to look yellow over time, it would be the fixative. And I like that layers mix together. I mean, there's some pastel artists that will, put a layer down and then they want to fix it because they want to do another layer on top, but they don't want the bottom layer to mix with the top layer. But I just like mixing it all. So, I mean, there are really good reasons to use a fixative, but I just don't need it. And I don't want anything to discolor over time. But the thing with pastel is if they're framed under glass, you don't want to use plexi or anything like that because it'll suck up the pastel. But if they're framed under glass, they're going to last a long time. And you don't want the glass to touch the pastel. So I do the mat to where there's a little space between the mat and the drawing so that the pastel isn't rubbing on the glass. You don't want it to touch anything, but they'll last, a very long time as long as they're kept out of sunlight and moisture. But of course, sunlight and moisture would ruin any work of art.
Exactly. Ultraviolet light, gravity, and water always win.
Yeah.
So you just have to take the necessary precautions. I think it's a very beautiful medium. I think for some time there might have been, I don't know how collectors felt about it, but I think there's a really strong resurgence of interest in mixed media, such as watercolor and pastel, and I think that's a good thing. What are you seeing in the collector market with pastels?
Well, I don't know about the collector market, but I know that there's a lot of experimentation and there's new technologies that inspire that experimentation. And I see a lot of artists combining things and trying new things, and I think that's all really exciting. By collector market, do you mean how things sell? Or?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Are buyers of art receptive to pastels like they would be to, say, oil paintings?
I think that pastels sell, and as far as how they sell compared to like an oil painting is, well, there's several considerations for that. One is, a pastel work on paper, it does have to be handled carefully, but, actually an oil does too. I mean, if you really understand what goes into it, because, those works on canvas, they really need to be varnished. Some artists varnish and take care of that responsibly, and I don't know about others. But as far as a collector and how things will survive, the thing about a piece that is framed archivally, without cardboard and stuff, is that that's going to last. And every 5 or 10 years, you might want to go down to the frame shop and get a new mat or something, dust it off. But that's something that's easily controlled by the person that buys it. Now, whether that big oil painting or even acrylic that you bought, I mean, do you know how it was varnished? People don't even know to ask about that. But that's a really important thing, because when I have done paintings, I've really stressed over the varnishing, like, I have to wait a year for this to dry. Carl, how many people do you know wait a year for their oil
I
painting
can
to
neither
dry?
confirm nor deny. Though there is one that I can firmly say, and that's Virgil Elliott. He was on the show a few episodes back. He's very concerned about conservation of art. He really feels that artists should give more attention to using archival materials.
Well, when I started doing the acrylic gouache, and then I kind of went crazy and did one on canvas. And I did some little miniatures on little tiny canvases that I did my research on how to varnish and all that. And I'm trying to do that as I should. Now, acrylics, you only have to wait about a week unless it's really thick. So the acrylic or acrylic gouache, that's really, I don't think I'll even go toward oil for some of those reasons, just how long you have to wait for things to dry, and my dogs are in the studio and I don't want them, to be subject to the smell and the chemicals and everything. So I'm real happy with the acrylic. The time investment is relatively minimal compared to oil. But of course I love oils, but I don't think I'll ever paint with oil. But you love working in oil though.
I love the patina of oil. There's a look about it, just draws me in. I love the look of it. It's nothing deeply intellectual there. I like the way it looks.
Yeah, it's got a strong visceral pull for you, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do have an appreciation for all the. See, I started off in acrylic. That was the very first thing I ever worked in. It was acrylics. And, it had its challenges, especially because I was learning how to paint and I wanted to do realistic or representational type art. And so it was a challenge to do that, especially I would get frustrated with the color shifts and the paint drying so fast that I couldn't do anything with it, or I couldn't save it quickly enough. And so eventually I made the transition to oils, which allowed me to work more slowly and more methodically. But then starting with oil, I got frustrated because it didn't dry fast enough.
There you go.
There was times I just wish it would just dry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love oil, and I've done some oils in my younger days, and I just loved it. But it just, I have a hard enough time with the health considerations with the pastel because, it's dust, and then breathing in. Are
you using a mask or anything like that? Or do you have, what kind of ventilation do you have?
No. Well, I have a big studio and I'll vacuum it up. I have a HEPA filter on the vacuum, and then I mop and I dust, I've got like a little catch on my drawing table, and I'll brush I have a brush that I'll brush the dust from my table down into the little catch, and then I just clean it up, and it's not really a problem. And when I blow dust off my pastel, I take it outside to blow it off. I use canned air to get a lot of the dust off, the loose dust, and then I go back in and tighten it up, and I do that outside.
When you say the loose, so you're talking about the artwork itself. After you've worked on it, you gently knock off whatever dust is loose on it.
Yeah, because if you don't, it'll come off in the frame, on the mat. So I give it a little shot of air, canned air, and get that loose dust. And then sometimes it'll take a little too much dust off, and I have to go back in and touch it up and kind of rub it. And that's what's really cool about doing the washes with the pastel and just, a little bit of dry pastel on top, is it seems to hold the pastel really well. When I blow it off, not as much dust comes off, which is kind of cool. Minimizes the amount of dust on the paper.
Different direction. As I've mentioned before, I'm a fanboy of your artwork. So I think, well, it just stands out. I've been really encouraged to see artists like Mark Maggiore and Stephen Datz and yourself and Ed Mell take a very stylistic approach to the American West landscape. And it's just, it's a very exciting thing to see this development in the art world. And you're in that area. That's why it was one of the reasons I like it. It stands out from a lot of what we're doing. What I want to know about is people's reaction to your art that stands out in your mind. I'm sure when you're in a gallery or maybe somebody's dropped you a note about how your art has affected them. I'd like to have a peek inside and find out how people are reacting to your art from what you've heard.
Well, a comment I got recently was from someone that's followed my work for, I don't know, about at least 10 years, 10 or 20 years. The comment was that I've always liked how I can be inside your work and I would want to live there. I would want to live in one of your interiors.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was wonderful because that's what I'm trying to do is create a imaginary space for people to project themselves into. So I thought that was pretty wonderful that he's comfortable enough with it that, you know, he would want to live there. Reactions like that are very, very appreciated. The main comment I've enjoyed are things like, I would want to live there because I want to create, you know, a mysterious yet on the positive side world. You know, for me, art is honestly an escape. It balances the real world because it's a place that we can go to and enjoy. That's a relaxing place. At least my work, I feel like even though, say in room number 7, there's a little bit of intrigue and questions about who is there, who's about to arrive and what's going on. But
or are they leaving?
Or are they leaving? You know, what's going on? But I think the viewer wants to engage in that space and they want to go into it and go through the room and go out the window or through the door. It's a place of interest and it's very dynamic and it's engaging, I hope. I mean, you know, different people respond in different ways. But I like that my work can be a place that people can enjoy and escape to.
Well, I liked your thought about it being, you know, there's an element of mystery to it. And I'm not talking about a murder mystery. I'm just talking about, you know, just curiosity, as you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, there's sort of the surrealist tendency of open-ended questions. You know, all the answers aren't given to you. It's meant to be thought-provoking and trying to start a dialogue with the viewer. Instead of them just walking right by, they kind of stop and think about what's going on and engage with it. You know, there's some statistics that people spend about 4 or 5 seconds looking at a work of art if you ever get them into a gallery. So I like the idea that some people stop and spend time with my work and think about it.
Yeah, it's cinema for your wall.
Well, I love that because I love the cinema, as you know, with my little experimental films that I've always treasured.
Well, that seems to be a trait of a number of artists is they're interested in different aspects of the visual arts.
I agree. I think creativity overlaps in different ways. And, you know, when I started doing the little films and doing photographs around the little films, you know, I never considered myself a photographer, but doing the little films made me think about framing and composition and lighting in a way I never had before. It really makes you pay attention to those things.
Well, in many respects, your pastels are they seem to be an extension to those little sets. And I need to back up and explain to to our audience here what we're talking about. See, I met you 10 years ago. It was at that time, it's been about 11 years ago, a revolutionary thing happened in filmmaking or video. And that was taking a DSLR camera and adding video capability to it. And because of the size of the sensor, you were able to create these beautiful cinematic films for just pennies on the dollar compared to what Hollywood was doing. And that's how I met you, was through someone else referred me to you and said, hey, have you seen this? And you were taking a little Canon DSLR, filming these little moody film noir looking figurines, little toys and sets and little tin houses and that sort of thing became a part of that. And they were very, very evocative. And it seems to be, it feeds the work that you do today.
Yeah, that was such a magical period in my life. And it was unusual because I'm not into technology that much. And, I really had to quickly learn a little bit about photography and filmmaking and lighting. But it was a very intense, creative period for me. And I was still able to make pastels at that time. There were certain little toys that I was drawn to. In fact, I've kept most of them. I don't have room to keep all of the toys that I collected, but there's certain little figures that I'll never let go of. They're just very magical. And it was a way for me to work figuratively, which I had not done before. But again, they were in these little houses and little rooms. So, I think there was a sense of moving inside and outside there too. That same sensibility of the house. And I love film noir. And I also loved Alfred Hitchcock movies in addition to film noir. And it was just fun to make these very cinematic little mini films. It was wonderful. So,
what's next for you?
Well, focus. I'm not doing as much photography, and I haven't done a little film in a few years. I'm really going to focus on my artwork and some of the new techniques that I'm excited about. I'm having fun with more landscape, and I've noticed kind of a pattern that's developing in my work that I'm enjoying, trying new things. After I went to Tucson, I'd never been there before. I went to Tucson. I'm in a gallery there.
What's the name of the gallery?
Jane Hamilton Fine Art. But I fell in love with saguaros. It was the oddest thing. Before I thought they were too trite, honestly. Like, oh, there's a cactus in that painting, blah, But I honestly fell in love with those saguaros, and I had no idea how big they were. They're monumental, the older ones. And I love the symbolism that they make the best of their situation. They hold on to that water and wait, for that very precious rain to come. And in the meantime, they suck up that water and hold it so the birds and the lizards, all the other little creatures can survive. They're kind of the life of the desert. And I think that's a real timely symbol for the age. They're just really amazing. I just saw them as sort of mean and prickly, but they're very life-giving. So I've got my kind of surreal cactus scenes that I'm having fun with.
Well, it seems like that Western landscape is hinted at in your work.
Yeah, there's always a landscape surrounding the house or framed, within the window of the door, the little painting inside. So, but, I love the landscape. My landscape is filtered through my kind of surrealistic lens, but
Sure.
I think focusing on the beauty of nature is a real important thing these days. We need to appreciate our landscapes as much as we can.
And there's so much variety in the landscape. It's just amazing. The transitions as you drive across the United States, for example, how the landscape changed. And yet there's beauty every step of the way as you go along.
Yes,
yeah,
there is. And more little houses. I'm not getting away from my kind of heartfelt imagery. It keeps going, but I love that I'm switching things up a little bit with new imagery and new techniques, and I still want to pursue works on canvas. So I'm going to experiment with that.
Smaller canvases, or will you go larger with the canvas?
I think I'll try a little larger. I don't work on a huge scale. That would be a really big jump for me. We'll see. You never know what's going to be around the bend. But most of the canvases probably under 24 inches. Anyway, not much bigger than my pastel imagery, probably.
Now you mentioned one gallery that you represented in. You're represented in multiple galleries. Is that correct?
Yes. When I was employed full time at the college, I really only had time for first my gallery in Santa Fe, Alexander Stevens, and then the past 4 or 5 years, I was also able to show it at a gallery in Amarillo as well. So Wilder Nightingale in Taos, New Mexico, Jane Hamilton in Tucson, and then Cerulean Gallery, which is here in Amarillo where I live. And they're also opening up a gallery this spring in Dallas. So
wow, nice.
I'll have 5 venues. And, my plan was to break out into more galleries. I think that's, a good way to make a living as an artist. So
how did those gallery relationships come about?
Well, I've been in Santa Fe for, almost 20 years. And in that particular gallery, and I showed in Santa Fe probably another 10 years before that at a different gallery. And I had maintained my gallery in Santa Fe while I was working full time because I only wanted one gallery because that's all I could produce for with my full-time job. But when I left Amarillo College, I was very focused on expanding into new galleries now that I would have more time to produce artwork. So I got a gallery in Taos with an old contact of mine, that Rob Nightingale. He used to sell my work years ago in Taos. And he's got a wonderful gallery. So I was fortunate enough to get into his gallery. And then Jane Hamilton in Tucson, she had seen my work the year before. A friend of hers had bought one of my pieces at the Alexander Stevens Gallery. And so a year later, she contacted me to show in her gallery in Tucson.
Nice.
Thrilled about that. And the Cerulean Gallery, I've showed there for probably about 5 or 6 years, I think. It's a great gallery here in Amarillo. And like I said, they're opening up a gallery in Dallas. And I'm excited to be in the Dallas market because some of my imagery leans toward the high plains, the little houses on the prairie. And I've done grain elevators, and I love the grain elevators. They're so mysterious, the old grain elevators. So I'm looking forward to having a place that will really be receptive to my kind of high plains imagery. So
it's nice to be displayed in your hometown.
Yes, and to be part of the art community here in town and meet other artists and see what people are doing. And
is it a strong art community there in Amarillo?
yes, it is. It is. There's some really excellent artists that live here. Amarillo was designated as a cultural site in Texas, I think 3 or 4 years ago, which is really exciting. So there's a lot of great artists, and I'm pleasantly surprised all the time to find a great diversity in art styles. It's not just what you would expect.
Well, wouldn't the world be a boring place if everybody painted exactly the same?
It really would be. But there's some realism and some Western art, and then there's some totally non-objective and abstract art.
Yeah.
To go along with it, there's great diversity. So it's wonderful.
I do like a wide variety of art and styles. It's like music, I have an eclectic taste in music, so it's all over the place. But that's the beauty of creating. Each of us can express ourselves as a reflection of our own individuality. Yes,
absolutely.
Well, Victoria, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I knew I had to talk to you when I saw this article in Southwest Art that came out back in August, the show preview there. And I said, I have to talk to Victoria. It's been many, many years. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule just to be able to talk with me and my audience here on The Artful Painter.
Well, I've been thrilled to do it. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Carl.
I'm really glad I had the opportunity to reconnect with Victoria Taylor-Gore. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I last spoke with her, and then it was about photography and filmmaking, which she was dabbling in at that time. But now to talk to her as an artist, that was so fascinating. She is creating some beautiful artwork, and if you want to see it, there's 2 ways you can do it. I have a few examples in the show notes for this episode, but you can go to her website, Victoria Taylor-Gore, and view her gallery there, victoriataylorgore.com. She also has links to her videos and her photography. It's well worth checking out. I want to thank everyone that continues to send feedback. Gina, for example, wrote this brief message. She says, "I am enjoying listening to the artist interviews. Thanks." Joyce wrote, "Enjoyed listening and am encouraged to keep on working." Sarah wrote this. She says, "Thank you for this podcast. I recently rediscovered my love for painting, and listening to another's journey toward becoming an artist helps keep me motivated to keep painting. I look forward to each new episode that comes out, and I enjoy the diversity of artists you interview. This is one of my favorite art podcasts. Hearing from the point of view of a fellow beginner, I find is less intimidating and more accessible than that of someone who has spent years and years in the business. The episode with Skip Whitcomb was particularly insightful. As a writer myself, I found his comparison of writing and painting to be spot on. His love of geology resonated with me as well, as someone who lives surrounded by the fascinating geology of Northern California. This podcast has encouraged me to start painting outside, something I had not considered doing when I started putting paint to canvas again last year. I'm primarily a painter of wildlife and previously tended to neglect the greater landscape, which I saw as just a habitat or a setting for my subject rather than a subject in and of itself. Thanks for the great podcast, Carl. Hey, Sarah, I really appreciate that. Her website is sarahskinnerwildlifeart.wordpress.com. If you want to check that out, I have a link in the show notes. Frank Walsh writes, "Keep doing what you're doing. Hi, Carl. I want to let you know how much I enjoy your podcast. I started listening to podcasts about a year ago while going on my daily run. The entertainment and information I get from your interviews are well worth it. I've been painting professionally as a marine artist for 35 years and just recently ventured outdoors to paint. Plein air painting while underwater is not an option. After spending half my life painting marine life, I needed to try something new to get that loving feeling back, so to speak. It worked, and I'm now painting with the joy I had years ago. Again, keep doing what you're doing. Now, we'll mention a couple of things, well, 3 things about Frank. So check out his website, frankwalshoriginals.com. Again, link in the show notes. Beautiful artwork there. He also provided some wonderful suggestions of artists to interview. So I thank you for those suggestions, and hopefully I might be able to arrange those. Sometimes it's a matter of scheduling and availability. I know some of these artists are extremely busy, and sometimes it's just real hard to pin down a time that's good for both of us. But I'll keep trying. Thank you for those suggestions. And one final thing, I want to acknowledge Frank's generous contribution to the Artful Painter. He made a donation, very generous donation, to help support this show. And by the way, you can do that too. All you have to do is go to carlolson.tv and click on the donate tab. Anything that you're able to do is very helpful. Well, let's continue. Here's an email from Scott. This is Scott Mayer. He says, "Hello, Carl. I wanted to take a moment to show my appreciation of your work and let you know how much I've enjoyed discovering your podcast. I'm an artist and also a video producer for Golden Peak Media, home of Artist Network, Artist Magazine, Watercolor Artist, Southwest Art, and more. Your Artful Painter podcast is an amazing source of information and inspiration. It was only recently that I discovered it, but I'm quickly powering through them." So thank you, Scott. I really appreciate that. And it's interesting that you're part of an organization that has really produced a lot of great resources for artists. This interview with Victoria Taylor-Gore, for example, that idea was stimulated by an article about her in Southwest Art. I've been getting that magazine for many, many, many years. So thank you, you and the team there at Golden Peak Media for producing this wonderful content for us. Tony writes, 1,000 thanks for the Artful Painter podcast. I've recently discovered it, having already listened to every past episode of The Savvy Painter and quite a lot of the Plein Air podcast too. I love your interview style, the fascinating guests, and even the music. I will no doubt listen to these interviews again and again. Like you, I've come to painting late. I was always artistic as a kid and took some painting lessons in my teens, painted a little now and then over the years, but not much and with no direction. I'm really an almost absolute beginner, and I'm in love. I've never heard of most of the painters I hear on podcasts, but I can't get enough of painting talk. I've made my living as a medical writer, but tomorrow is my last day of work. I'm retiring and will have so much more time for art. I'm converting our guest room into a tiny studio. And I even bought Dan McCall's book this morning after hearing about it on your podcast. Now, I do have one question for you. I love the music that accompanies your podcast episodes and think it would be great background for both painting and writing. I wonder if you could include music credits in your show notes and or send me some titles and musicians. Thanks again. Tony, thank you so much for this email. And first of all, congratulations on retiring and being able to devote more time to painting. I'm excited for you. And thank you for buying that book by Dan McCall. That is a fantastic book. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. It's an expensive one. It's hard to find an affordable copy of it, but it's one of the few I say is probably worth it to get. And finally, your question about the music in this podcast. I get the music for this podcast. I license it. You can't just drop music on YouTube or a podcast or any type of online media like that. What you have to do is license it. That ensures that the musicians get paid. So I subscribe to a service called Epidemic Sound. They are fantastic. And you don't have to subscribe to it, though. You can browse their library and just start playing. It's great music. It's not, it doesn't have any funky watermark sounds or anything like that. You can just play it. And I think their music list, their playlist are also available on Spotify. Let's see here. This one is from Margaret. She says, Dear Carl, I've just recently learned of your excellent podcast, and I'm enjoying them very much. I was just listening to your interview with Skip Whitcomb and was intrigued by the mention of a book about glacier hunters that you were talking about. Now, she goes on to continue that she couldn't find the book. What happened is I failed to include the link in the show notes to this book, so it was kind of hard for her to find. So I went ahead and emailed her a link, and I'll just let you know the link is now there in those show notes with Skip Whitcomb if you were trying to find that book as well. It's called The Ice Finders, by the way. So anyway, she continues. She says, thank you for your excellent interviews. I'm enjoying and learning. Happy painting and podcasting. All the best, Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. I really appreciate your note. I always love hearing from everyone. So if you want to send me a note, ask a question, all you have to do is go to my website at carlolson.tv and click the contact tab and fill out the information there. Thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next edition.
Picture on the TV.